When arrogant billionaire Richard Stanton walks into the courtroom, he expects his wealth to shield him from justice. But Judge Monica Carter isn't intimidated by power or privilege. As the trial unfolds and the truth comes to light, the judge's final decision sends shockwaves through the courtroom and beyond. Don't miss how this gripping story of justice and accountability unfolds. Subscribe now and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. In the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds, a courtroom stood as a beacon of justice. The air was thick with anticipation as people from all walks of life filled the wooden benches, their eyes fixed on the front of the room. Whispers danced through the crowd, each one more dramatic than the last, painting a picture of the man who was about to enter. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and in walked a man with an air of confidence that seemed to fill the entire room. His name was Richard Stanton, a billionaire known for his lavish lifestyle and ruthless business tactics. Dressed in an impeccable designer suit, his slicked-back hair gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights. He moved with the grace of someone who believed the world was his stage, a smirk playing on his lips, as if the crowd had gathered to celebrate him, not to witness his judgment. Richard Stanton was accused of swindling millions from hardworking families, leaving them in financial ruin. But to him, it was just another day in the life of a businessman. As he settled into his seat at the defendant's table, he seemed unfazed by the gravity of the situation, casually flipping through a legal pad as if it were a magazine. Then, the Honorable Judge Monica Carter entered the room. Clad in her black robe, she moved with a quiet authority that commanded respect. Her reputation as a no-nonsense judge preceded her, and the room fell silent as she approached the bench. All rose, as was customary, except for Richard Stanton. He remained seated, seemingly oblivious to the protocol, his focus on the papers in front of him. Judge Carter paused, her gaze settling on the defendant. The silence grew heavier, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Who did this man think he was? But Richard didn't flinch. His expression was one of smug indifference, almost daring the judge to react. "You may be seated," Judge Carter said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't address the slight, not yet. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The tension was palpable, a living thing that seemed to squeeze the air out of the room. The trial began, and as the days dragged on, the courtroom became a stage for the unfolding drama. Witnesses took the stand, each one adding a new layer to the story of Richard's deceit. There was Sarah, a single mother who had lost her life savings, and David, a retired teacher who had invested his pension only to see it vanish. Their testimonies were heartbreaking, painting a picture of devastation and loss. But Richard remained unperturbed. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone or whispering jokes to his attorney. To him, these were just stories, irrelevant noise that wouldn't change the outcome he was sure was in his favor. The prosecution presented evidence, emails, bank records, and testimonies from former employees. Each piece of evidence was like a nail in Richard's metaphorical coffin, yet he showed no remorse. His arrogance was on full display, and the crowd watched in disbelief as he treated the courtroom like his personal stage. Then came the day of Sarah's testimony. She stepped up to the stand, her voice shaky but determined. "I trusted him," she said, looking directly at Richard. "I trusted him with everything I had, and he destroyed my family's future." Richard didn't even glance at her, his focus on his phone. The judge, her patience wearing thin, finally addressed him. "Mr. Stanton, put your phone away now," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Richard looked up, unfazed. "I was just checking something important," he replied, holding up the device as if to prove his point. The judge's tone hardened. "I said now." For a moment it seemed like he might argue, but then, reluctantly, he set the phone down. The damage, however, was already done. The courtroom was a sea of disbelief and anger, and the trial marched on. The trial reached its final day, and the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised and cameras ready. The gallery was packed with victims, their faces a mix of anger and hope. All eyes were on Judge Monica Carter as she prepared to deliver the sentence. Richard Stanton sat at the defense table, his posture as relaxed as ever. He even had the audacity to flash a small grin to the cameras as they captured his every move. He didn't look like a man about to face judgment. He looked like a man convinced he had already won. When Judge Carter finally spoke, the room fell silent. "Mr. Stanton," she began, her voice steady and deliberate, "you have been found guilty on all counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the testimonies of your victims paint a clear picture of your actions. You manipulated, exploited, and destroyed the lives of countless people, all for personal gain." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The judge continued, "Throughout this trial, you have shown a blatant lack of remorse. Your behavior in this courtroom has been nothing short of disgraceful. You have insulted your victims, disregarded this court's authority, and treated these proceedings as if they were beneath you." The crowd murmured in agreement. Sarah, sitting in the front row, clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles white. Judge Carter's tone shifted, becoming colder. "Justice, Mr. Stanton, is not about wealth, power, or privilege. It is about accountability. And today, you will face the consequences of your actions." The room was so quiet, you could hear the faint rustling of paper. Richard's smirk faltered for the first time as he straightened in his chair. The judge declared, "Therefore, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Richard's face froze, the blood draining from his cheeks. 25 years? He thought. He had been expecting a slap on the wrist, maybe a few months in a cushy facility. But this was unheard of for someone of his stature. Judge Carter wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she announced, "I am ordering the immediate liquidation of your assets to repay the victims of your crimes. Every dollar you stole will be returned to the families you devastated." The courtroom broke into stunned murmurs. Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. David leaned back in his seat, his eyes wide with disbelief. Richard shot up from his chair, his face red with anger. "You can't do this!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the room. "I'm Richard Stanton. You can't treat me like some common criminal." The judge's gavel slammed down, her expression unyielding. "Mr. Stanton, sit down," she commanded. But Richard wasn't finished. "This is a joke. I'll appeal this. I'll have your career ruined, Judge." The bailiffs moved closer, ready to intervene. Judge Carter remained calm, her voice cutting through his outburst like a knife. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Stanton, and you will show respect." The bailiffs escorted the defendant out as he continued to protest, his voice growing fainter with each step. The courtroom erupted into applause, something that rarely happened but felt entirely appropriate in the moment. Judge Carter turned to the audience, her expression softening just slightly. "Justice has been served," she said. "Let this be a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." As the courtroom emptied and the cameras outside began flashing, one question lingered in everyone's minds. Would this sentence be enough to truly change a man like Richard Stanton? The courtroom was nearly empty now, save for a few lingering reporters and victims gathering their belongings. The buzz of excitement still hung in the air, but for those directly affected by Richard's crimes, the emotions were more complex. Sarah stood by the courthouse steps, clutching her purse tightly. A reporter approached her with a microphone. "How do you feel after today's verdict?" the reporter asked. Sarah hesitated, then said, "I feel relieved, but the truth is, no sentence will erase the damage he caused. My kids and I are still rebuilding, but at least now, we have hope." Nearby, David was speaking with a friend. "It's not just about the years he's getting," he said, shaking his head. "It's about the message. People like him think they're untouchable. Today proves they're not." Inside her chambers, Judge Monica Carter sat quietly, staring out the window at the commotion below. She didn't feel triumph or victory, just a steady resolve. Her role wasn't about personal satisfaction. It was about ensuring fairness, about reminding everyone that the scales of justice could balance even against the weight of wealth and privilege. Richard Stanton's name would continue to make headlines for a while, but for the people he had wronged, the chapter was finally closing. The financial restitution would help many of them start over, but the scars he left behind would take longer to heal. As the weeks passed, the story sparked conversations across the country. It became a rallying cry for accountability, for holding those in power to the same standards as everyone else. People shared their own stories of injustice, drawing strength from the verdict. Perhaps the most powerful moment came from Sarah's youngest daughter, who wrote a letter to Judge Carter that was later published in a local newspaper. "Thank you for standing up for my family," It read, "Thank you for showing us that people like Richard Stanton can't get away with hurting people like us. You didn't just give us justice, you gave us a second chance." The story of Richard Stanton's trial was more than just a courtroom drama. It was a reminder of the resilience of ordinary people, the importance of integrity, and the belief that justice can and should prevail, no matter the odds. So, as you sit with this story, ask yourself, what does accountability mean to you and in your own life? How can you ensure that fairness and justice are not just ideals, but actions? Because in the end, justice isn't just the responsibility of the courts. It's something we all have to fight for every day.